There's a great line in this film that I feel captures what I admire so much about your work as a storyteller and artist, and it's when a character says, "Comfort is overrated." I would love to know the origin of that line as an artist who excitingly pushes against traditionalism and what meaning it may possess for you.
Sure, and I'm glad you like that line too, because I really I feel very proud of that line. And sometimes it's
Yeah,
hard to say when I write a line and I'm like, oh, that's a good line. I have to just
yeah,
be a little like, it's okay. But I think that that line and that sentiment, is there's a couple of different things that are happening. On the one hand, I like that it's such an unexpected thing for a character to say, and maybe even a character who we know. I mean, it's said by the school nurse, and
right.
so what we would hope that we would have, not just in a school nurse, but in an adult, in a school environment, would be to make sure that the students are comfortable. So we know a little bit about where this nurse is coming from on some level, or actually where we don't know where she's coming from at all. It's a very tricky line for her to deliver. And yet I think about that in my own life, not in a way that simply is that, sometimes I wear the wrong pair of shoes that look great, but that
Mhm.
are not comfortable at all. And I choose aesthetics over comfort. I do that quite a bit. But more so like, as a creative person, as a writer and a filmmaker, I spend a lot of time being really like out of my comfort zone, so to
Right.
say. And we hear that term over and over again. But do we really practice it? Because it's, being uncomfortable is uncomfortable. It's like you always want
Right.
to try to go, you sort of like try to minimize the discomfort as much as you can to get back to the comfort. But if someone kind of says to you that line, like, well, comfort is overrated, then maybe it gives you permission to be more comfortable with being a bit to being uncomfortable, right? Because if there were other things like, if someone said, I mean, right now I'm kind of suffering from the sriracha shortage. But if someone
Mm.
were to say to me like, sriracha is overrated, then I might be
Mm.
like, oh yeah, okay, I can live without sriracha, I guess. Like it's giving me permission to sort of deal with it. So that line it's deep. I mean, there's a couple other kind of zingers in Perpetrator that I wonder if people will have to, when eventually when it's on streaming or on DVD, if they have to pause it and be like, hold on, what did they just say? I got to unpack that.
Yeah, yeah, and I might bring them up. So, just how liquids, blood, and bodily goo are at the center of this film, I feel like it's mirrored so well in the way that you capture it. Like, I love how the images, like, bleed into each other, whether that's through color, light, or framing. Could you talk about homing in on that visual motif, I guess, and finding unique ways to carry that through in the visual landscape?
Sure. I mean, one of the reasons that I really like working in genre, or working sort of like in a kind of a genre adjacent space, is because, like genre films, and I'm being very broad, but allow for a really robust, rich visual storytelling, which is what I want. I mean, I made films in art school. I didn't go to film school. I mean, I've never made traditional art. I made films in art school, in that context. And so color and texture and these superimpositions, images, and that, and framing, it's all part of the storytelling. And I like to get surreal, I like to get fantastical, I like to, just as you say, even there's room for kind of long cross dissolves where faces blur and
Right.
landscapes become something else. And aesthetically, that feels productive to me, but it also feels productive, when you're making a film that has psychological, kind of ickiness.
Right.
And so, but it's hard, I have to have those conversations with the cinematographer to make sure that they're on board,
Mhm.
with doing all of this. And then the same thing with the editor, because I think that sometimes editors are like, oh, I hate cross dissolves. We're going to do our superimpositions, hard cuts. And, when, and sometimes that can be a battle to say, hold on, I have a vision for this scene. I have a vision for this transition that is not simply, some kooky, visual trick. It's narrative content. I'm glad that you that you brought that up, because it's purposeful, like from the very concept, through the script, through shooting, through post-production.
Right. I want to get into a little bit of that visual poetry a little bit more. Like you have like so many like great blink and you'll miss it visual moments, such as things happening in red light, hair standing up on arms, and teeth. What is it like to be like, oh man, this is such a great shot, but it's only going to be there for a beat or two, and then we're moving on? Is there like much of an internal struggle for you and your cinematographer to be like, yeah, I want to linger on this just a little bit longer because it's such a cool image, but I can't because I got to keep moving?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard. And sometimes the funny part is like, you don't have that much footage. So for instance, like bringing up the standing up, hair standing up on the arm, we shot that scene, that little blip, almost a year ago. Like we had to come back and do some pickups, and it was sweltering August in Chicago. I just was like, how are we going to make the hair on Kiah's arm stand up? How do we do that? We were putting ice on her arm. I was whispering into her ear. Nothing was working. And so then we had to do a sequence where we were just blasting her arm with canned air, that you would clean the camera lens. And so we did it, but it looked like then we had to in post kind of slow it down and sort of reverse it. So when it was, I was like, it's fine if we use 15 frames of it, because if we do 16 frames, the whole trick will be revealed, and it will be terrible. But there were scenes like, I will say, not without spoiling it, the scene with the blood well, the fight that's in the big blood well, I mean, it also felt like, I feel so proud of how that turned out. That was totally practical. That's all practical. And yet, you don't want to show too much of that so that an audience starts to scrutinize how realistic that would be. I mean, that's a real allegorical scene. And so it has to feel like there's just enough of it to feel freaky and kind of unknown and unknowable. But then you have to kind of yank the audience back out of there, back into kind of the reality of the film. And, there's times with my editor where I'm like, he's like, well, we have to cut this down at some point. I'm like, okay, but not today. Can I have 2 more seconds of that shot just today, and then we'll cut it tomorrow? And he's like, okay, fine.
I wanted to move over to the spoken language and how you casualize it. Like one of my favorite scenes is when Jonny and Electra meet for the first time, and it starts with like conversation of vomit, what you had for lunch, to dead rabbit, to abortion. And so that flow is really compelling. Is there a process in place that you have to kind of casualize the chaos and even working that out with the actors?
Yeah, because it's melodramatic, I mean, that's very melodramatic dialogue. And, the actor's instinct is always to deliver it melodramatically. And, sometimes I will let them do that to get it out of their system. And then I come back in and I'm like, you have to bleed this whole thing out of emotion, deadpan, deadpan, deadpan. And that can feel very unnatural, very uncomfortable at first, and I'm like, it's going to work. I guarantee you that this is going to work. That the combination of, these 2 teenage girls who are totally over it in this deadpan manner, but talking about something, obviously Electra's pregnant. Yeah, there's the reference to, a coat hanger abortion. That's serious. That's a very serious conversation, especially among strangers in a bathroom. And yet I think the seriousness of it, actually, there's more power in it. There's more weight in it when it is bled out of that kind of affect and emotion, rather than like, Electra coming in and being like, it's dead rabbit. And, just because I think in real life, in real life, when we say things to people, whether they're strangers or to people that we know very well, that have a lot of weight to it, sometimes it is so hard to kind of get it out of your mouth that you really do say it more quietly than you thought you would, or you do say it in a way that's like, once I say this, then it's out there, and you don't blurt it out. You don't yell it out. I mean, I pay attention to stuff like that. I pay attention to when my children say, I need to tell you something that happened to me at school today. It's not kind of like, oh, I need to tell you something. It's like they can barely get it out, because once it's out, it's out there. So I've also learned that in real life, that feels kind of authentic to sort of jam the melodrama into the the deadpan.
Yeah. It's almost like there's some other scenes, like one where there's a line saying, I've been buried twice. Like it's just so casually spoken.
Right.
It's almost like these like comedic punctuations within like a very intense and thrilling moment, or a serious one, as you said earlier.
I mean, I can't help but to make a joke, like even in my real life, which is probably which probably for some people are like, oh, I'm glad you're not, my mother, or my partner, something like that, or my sibling, because I am the person when there's a very serious situation will be the one who's like quietly cracks like a joke that feels really inappropriate,
Mhm.
and partially because I find it's not like I find the situation funny, but I find those like the absurdity, in situations, that can be deadly serious, and heartbreaking even, and so it's not as though, I mean, I think of myself as a sympathetic person. I think of myself sometimes even as an empathetic person. I have a very soft heart. So my tendency to kind of point out the absurd that kind of turns into a joke is not to make light of it. It's to kind of like come to the heartbreak from a different angle. It's like the heartbreak or the hard part is a house, and going up the front steps is, you'll sort of like find the exact same experience, but if you really want to experience the thing, you have to kind of kick in the basement window. And I just can't resist it. I mean, someone told me once that my film is not round, and this was a German speaking person. I was like, what does that mean? And he said, well, your film has these sharp corners. And so exactly like you're mentioning, that line, like, when she says like, I've been buried alive twice, and with some, even with a little bit of joy and pride in that, that to me does land like a joke. Or when the cop is like, her scalp is missing and all of her teeth, it's like he's trying to process that also, and can't possibly understand that, like, don't tell that to those girls, like, what are you doing? And so it's a lot of it partially is about establishing these characters that are also a little unpredictable. I mean, I think that there's something that's really, for me, both as a consumer of films and like a storyteller, I like characters that are a little just out of reach, that are just a little unpredictable. Because I think that genre films are always about introducing people for whom you're like, I do not know what that person's going to do next, including even just saying a line that feels inappropriate.
You probably grew up watching a lot of Addams Family, I imagine.
Yes, yeah. I mean, and lots of other, oddly, like my parents love like kind of misfit movies, and I grew up watching, like Mel Brooks. I mean, for instance, like, talk about humor that's just like, oh my gosh, like, what did they just say? I mean, I really have loved storytellers that lean into the outrageous.
Yeah. Well, I know we're out of time, but thank you so much for this. I hope you have every intention of continuing this story in some form or fashion, because where it ends, it's just like, please, no, just keep going.
What's next, right? I will, I promise.
Cry, cry, cry.